The morning fog still clung to the pine trees when Sheriff Frank Donovan parked his cruiser on the gravel shoulder. Coldwater Cove was a small town on the Washington coast where people left their doors unlocked and kids rode bikes to school without parents watching. Population 3,000. 0 homicides in 20 years. Frank liked it that way. He was 6 months from retirement and planning to spend his days fishing on the lake with a pole and a cooler of sandwiches. He stepped out into the cold October air. The smell of wet earth and pine needles filled his lungs. 20 yards ahead, 2 patrol cars sat with their lights off. A small group of teenagers stood huddled together, wrapped in jackets, holding paper cups of coffee that steamed in the cold. Officer Jensen walked toward him with a tablet in his hands and an expression that Frank had learned to recognize over 18 years as sheriff. Something was wrong. Something beyond the usual. Jensen stopped in front of him. The young officer's face was pale beneath his cap. "Sheriff, the mother called at 6 this morning. The girl didn't come home after a party last night." Frank frowned. He looked past Jensen at the teenagers. They weren't talking to each other. They weren't looking at each other. They stood in a loose cluster, staring at the ground or at the trees or at nothing at all. "Party? I didn't authorize any gathering out here." It wasn't authorized. The old Keller cabin. The one for rent. Kids broke in through the back door. A neighbor spotted movement and called around 2 in the morning. By the time we got there, the place was empty. Except for this. Jensen handed Frank an evidence bag. Inside was a phone with a floral case. The screen was cracked like a spider web. Frank turned it over. On the back, a faded sticker read Maya. Maya Chen. 17 years old. High school senior. Debate team captain. Frank saw her almost every morning at the diner on Main Street, buying a tea with honey and a blueberry muffin before school. Always polite. Always with her earbuds around her neck and a textbook under her arm. The kind of kid who was supposed to be safe in a town like this. The kind of kid whose mother probably never worried until this morning. He held the evidence bag up to the gray sky. A cracked screen meant the phone had hit something hard. Or someone had dropped it on purpose. Phones don't crack themselves. They don't end up on the floor of abandoned cabins by accident. "Any history of running away?" he asked. Jensen shook his head. "Clean record. Good grades. No drugs. No disciplinary issues." Her mother said she was happy. Looking forward to college applications. He paused and lowered his voice. "But there's something else, Sheriff. The kids who were at the party, they're all saying the exact same thing." Frank looked at the teenagers again. 3 of them stood apart from the others. They were better dressed. Better fed. The kind of kids whose parents wrote checks to the school and sat on the town council and never had to worry about anything. The blond boy stood with his chin slightly raised. A practiced look of calm on his face that didn't belong on a 17-year-old. The bigger boy kept his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, eyes fixed on the ground. The blonde girl had tears in her eyes, but she wasn't actually crying. Just standing there with wet eyes, waiting for something to happen. Jensen spoke quietly. "The blonde one is Cole Bennett. His father is Judge Bennett. The bigger kid is Liam Wright. His family owns the cannery and half the properties on this lake. The blonde girl is Tara Finch. Her mother is the dean at Coldwater University. Frank nodded slowly. He understood now. He understood why they weren't looking at each other. They didn't need to. They already knew what they were going to say. They say Maya left the party alone around midnight, Jensen continued. Apparently she got into a fight with her boyfriend. Kid named Ethan. She said she was walking back to town. The others confirm it. Frank looked at the road that led back to Coldwater Cove. 12 miles of dark pavement through dense forest. No streetlights. No houses. No cell service for most of the way. On an October night with temperatures near freezing. And nobody offered her a ride. They say the boyfriend tried. She pushed him away. Told him to go to hell. Frank walked toward the group. His boots made soft sounds on the damp earth. The three teenagers watched him approach. None of them spoke. None of them moved. They just waited. Like they had been waiting all morning. Like they would keep waiting until someone told them it was over. He stopped in front of them. He looked at each face in turn. Cole Bennett met his eyes without blinking. Liam Wright stared at the ground. Tara Finch looked at nothing at all. Frank didn't speak for a long moment. He just looked. 18 years as sheriff had taught him that silence was the best tool he had. People filled silence with truth or with lies, but they always filled it with something. These three didn't fill it with anything. They just waited. Finally, he turned and walked back to Jensen. The teenagers didn't move. They didn't look relieved. They didn't look at each other. They just stood there in the cold, waiting for whatever came next. "I want a map of the area," Frank said. "I want search dogs here in 2 hours. And I want you to find Maya's best friend. The one who wasn't at that party." Jensen nodded. "You really don't think she ran away, Sheriff?" Frank looked at the cabin in the distance. A dark shape against the gray sky. He thought about the cracked phone. The matching stories. The way those three kids had stood there like statues, not looking at each other, not saying a word, just waiting. Teenagers who run away don't leave their phones behind. And three kids who all tell the same story without looking at each other. That's not memory. That's rehearsal. 2 hours later, Frank stood at the edge of the lake with a map spread across the hood of his cruiser. The search dogs had arrived. Their handlers waited for instructions, stamping their feet against the cold. Behind him, the teenagers had been taken to the station. All except Cole. A black sedan pulled up. Judge Bennett stepped out. He was a tall man with silver hair and the kind of posture that came from decades in courtrooms. He walked toward Frank with measured steps, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel. His expression was one of concerned fatherhood. It was also completely controlled. Frank watched him approach. He had known Judge Bennett for 15 years. They had attended the same Chamber of Commerce meetings. The same holiday parties. The same fundraisers. But they had never stood on opposite sides of anything. Until now. The judge stopped a few feet away. He didn't offer his hand. "This is a terrible situation. My son and his friends are fully cooperating." Frank waited. He had learned that lesson a long time ago. When powerful people talk, they always have a point. The trick is to let them get to it. Judge Bennett looked at the lake. Then at the cabin. Then back at Frank. Is this scale of search really necessary? Teenagers have disagreements. They storm off. It happens. Frank studied the older man's face. The carefully neutral expression. The calm voice. The way he didn't quite meet Frank's eyes. 12 miles on foot at midnight. That's not storming off. That's disappearing. The judge's expression didn't change. If anything, it grew warmer. More understanding. It was a good performance. I'm not minimizing the situation. I'm just thinking about resources. The county budget isn't unlimited. And there was a boy involved. The jealous type, apparently. Maybe that's where your focus should be. Frank nodded slowly. We'll be talking to him. Good. The judge paused. My son is a good kid. They're all good kids. A little foolish for breaking into that cabin, yes. But they're not criminals. Keep that in mind. He turned and walked back to his sedan. Cole sat in the passenger seat staring straight ahead. The car pulled away slowly. Gravel crunched under the tires. Frank watched the car disappear around a bend in the road. Then he folded his map and drove to the station. He needed to talk to Maya's best friend. He needed to understand what had really happened last night. Because whatever the three kids were hiding, it wasn't just a party and a disagreement. The Coldwater Cove police station was a small building on Main Street. It smelled like coffee and old paper and the particular staleness of a place where nothing much ever happened. Frank walked past the empty desks to an interview room. A girl sat with her hands wrapped around a paper cup. She had red eyes and the kind of exhaustion that came from crying all night. Frank sat down across from her. The table between them was scratched and worn. Sarah. Thank you for coming in. She nodded without speaking. Her hands trembled slightly around the cup. I need you to think carefully. Did Maya tell you anything about the party last night? Anything at all? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke. Her voice was hoarse. She wasn't going to go. She said Cole made her uncomfortable. Frank waited. He didn't push. He had learned that people tell more when you don't interrupt. Cole and Maya used to be friends. Really good friends. But something happened last year. She never told me what. Just that she didn't trust him anymore. When Cole started planning this party, Maya didn't want to be there. But she went anyway. Because of Ethan. Her boyfriend. He's friends with Liam. He said it would be weird if she didn't come. Sarah's voice cracked. She texted me around 11. Said she wanted to leave but Ethan was having fun and didn't want to go. I told her to call her parents. She said she'd figure it out. Frank pulled out the evidence bag with Maya's phone. Did she text you after that? Sarah shook her head. I fell asleep. When I woke up this morning, I saw the news. I called her phone like 20 times. Nothing. Frank set the phone aside. Did Maya ever mention anything about Cole, Liam, or Tara that seemed strange? Anything that might explain why she wanted to leave that party? Sarah looked down at her cup. The coffee had gone cold. She hadn't taken a single sip. Last month, Maya told me that Cole asked her to meet him at the old boathouse. She thought it was weird, but she went. When she got there, Liam and Tara were there too. They said they wanted to talk about old times. But Maya said it felt like an interview. Like they were testing her. Asking what she remembered about some night last summer. Frank leaned forward. What night last summer? I don't know. She wouldn't tell me. She just said she was glad she didn't remember anything, because the way they looked at her when she said that, it scared her. Frank wrote that down. Did she ever meet them again? No. She started avoiding them. She told Ethan she didn't want to be around them, but Ethan said she was being paranoid. He said Cole and Liam were his friends and she needed to get along. Frank sat back in his chair. The old wood creaked beneath him. He thought about 3 kids in a boathouse, asking questions about a night last summer. He thought about a girl who was scared but didn't know why. He thought about a party she didn't want to attend and a boyfriend who told her she was being paranoid. He looked at Sarah across the table. She was 17 years old. She had just lost her best friend. And she was sitting in a police station trying to remember every detail that might help. I should have told her to stay home last night, Sarah whispered. I should have made her stay. Frank shook his head. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. He stood up and walked to the door. Then he stopped and turned back. Sarah. That night last summer. Did Maya ever mention anything about it? Any detail at all? A date? A place? Other people? Sarah thought for a long moment. Then she looked up. She mentioned the lake. Just once. She said something happened at the lake. But she didn't remember what. And she was glad she didn't. Frank left Sarah with a deputy and walked to his office. He closed the door and stood at the window. Outside, Main Street looked exactly the same as it always did. The hardware store. The diner. The bank. A town where nothing ever happened. But something had happened. And he was going to find out what. 3 days later, the search dogs found her. Not in the lake, as Frank had feared. Deeper in the woods, nearly 2 miles from the cabin. Covered with branches and pine needles. The autopsy showed no signs of violence. A fall. A rock. A terrible accident. But accidents don't hide themselves. People do. Frank spent those 3 days pulling threads. Phone records showed calls between Cole, Liam, and Tara in the hours after the party. Dozens of them. Social media messages deleted but not entirely gone. And finally, Ethan broke. Sitting in this same interview room, crying, he told Frank everything. The party. The argument. The shove that happened too close to the rocks. The panic. The decision to carry her into the woods. The promise they all made to each other in the boathouse at dawn. When Frank walked into Judge Bennett's chambers with the warrant, the judge didn't say a word. He just looked at his son, who sat in the corner with his practiced calm finally shattered. Cole Bennett was crying. Real tears this time. Too late for Maya Chen. Too late for everyone. The trial lasted 6 weeks. National news called it the Coldwater Cove cover-up. The Wright family sold the cannery to pay for lawyers. The university dean took a leave of absence. Judge Bennett recused himself and watched from the gallery as his son was sentenced to 5 years for reckless endangerment and tampering with evidence. Liam and Tara received similar sentences. They were 18 now. Adults. Old enough to know better. Frank Donovan retired the following spring. He bought a better fishing pole. But he never did spend much time on the lake. Every time he looked at the water, he thought about Maya-chan. About the night she died. About the people who chose silence over truth. About the price they all paid in the end. Somewhere in Coldwater Cove, a mother still sets a place at the dinner table. A father still visits a grave in the cemetery. And 3 young adults sit in prison cells, learning what happens when fear wins over doing the right thing. The fog lifts every morning over the lake. The town goes on. But nothing is quite the same. Because once you learn what people are capable of, you can never unlearn it. And once you know the price of silence, you understand that some things cost more than you ever imagined.